Welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast, where we drop the pressure, find the joy, and thrive, even when it feels like life is stuck on level 12 hard. I'm Amanda Diekman, author, autistic adult, and mom of 3. I'm not here as an expert, but a fellow traveler. Together, we're learning how to live more gently, authentically, and vibrantly in this wild parenting life. Hey guys, on today's episode of the podcast, I have Laura Petix, who is a neurodivergent pediatric occupational therapist and an author, and you might know her online. In fact, you probably do, as the OT Butterfly. And I have been looking forward to this conversation for years. I loved it, and I know you're going to love it too. Laura, welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm so excited to finally get to talk with you. I've been such a fan of yours for a long time, so thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I know. I'm excited to have somebody who can really bring that expertise about sensory and the nervous system, because it's such a huge part of the kinds of demands that come up, the things that trigger our kids into all the big behaviors we're not expecting to see. And I find that sensory processing differences is the gateway drug of the neurodivergent community. It's like
Yes.
first thing you get.
Yes.
OTs are often the first safe professional who will truly co-regulate your child, as opposed to using a behaviorist approach. And it's just a super soft landing ground for a lot of us. So I feel very warm and fuzzy having you here.
That makes
OTs
me so
have been
happy.
some of our favorite professionals. Many of them listen to the podcast. We love you.
Yay.
And also, when we first start the journey, especially recognizing the way that co-regulation and meeting sensory needs can improve behaviors, what I find is that some parents then are like, ooh, this is the lever I can pull. If you're melting down, go use your fidget or jump on the trampoline. And they end up using these strategies as a way to try to control their kids. And you're like, I gotta do the sensory diet so things don't get bad. And so I wanted to start by asking you, how do we know the difference between a kind of accommodation that is really supportive to our sensory sensitive kids, and how do we tell if it's becoming a demand and we should actually drop it rather than pushing the accommodation? How do you understand that?
So I look at a couple things. So like you were mentioning, there's a sensory tool isn't going to work 100% of the time in 100% of the environment. So there is almost like a window of time when it's going to be the most optimal, because we don't exist in a vacuum. So depending on what our current state of our nervous system is, will dictate whether or not a sensory tool that worked for us yesterday is going to work for us right now. Because just because our kids love squeezing things or they really love tight hugs, maybe in the moment that you're trying to offer it to them is not the right moment. And what I always recommend parents do, like the first step before they're trying to figure out what accommodation to do, what sensory tool to do, and I was like, please spend a lot of time just purely observing. And as parents, we're thinking, I observe them every day. I've lived with them since the day they were born, or however long you've been with the person you're caregiving for. But I say, no, intentionally observe them like you're a scientist, like you're not intervening. You're actually taking notes, whether it's digital notes, whether it's written notes, whether you're a spreadsheet person, however it is, get it out of your brain and something that you can visualize and track, because that's what's going to at least start helping us understand what they gravitate toward, what's something that they gravitate away from. And then we can start thinking, is there a certain time of day, a certain time of activity, and how can we recreate that? What are other ways we can offer that? Because we always are going to need something that's variable, that changes for the environment. We need something that's portable. We need something that maybe didn't work yesterday. We have something today. So the best answer to finding out whether something is an accommodation for their child is first starting with an observation, and then really then putting those things into practice, and then again, observe again. Like a true scientist, an occupational therapist will tell you, evaluation is ongoing. We're constantly re-examining. It's not like we figure it out and then we do it and then we're like, done, solved it off the list. It's no, let's move on from that. Let's see if they need something else. And then we can also observe what their nervous system response is to that tool, and if it's helping them function in that particular task at that one particular time. Again, it's not something that's just binary, it works or doesn't work. So it
Mm.
really, you really have to turn on those observational skills.
I see that so many of the what's expected for bodies to do is also very, so it's we expect that good listeners are like have still bodies and quiet hands and are sitting in a circle
Right.
and with like eye contact, right? And like actually all of those are just ableist standards.
Yeah.
And that maybe for your child, what is actually paying attention is standing at the back of the room, rocking, and looking
Mm-hmm.
out the window. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can't judge just by looking at that kid and say, oh, they're
Yeah.
distracted and not paying attention. That's actually their attentive posture. So how do you
Yeah.
navigate that reality? Because for
Yeah.
so long we've believed that good bodies look one way. And now I think as a society, we're really appreciating that's actually a really
Yeah.
oppressive standard that's being
Yeah.
applied.
When I'm talking to teachers or parents about them really focusing just on the surface level behavior and judging that, right? I take a step back and I ask them more questions. I say, what is our goal right now of this, of what you're saying, right? If the teacher's saying, my goal is for them to learn the curriculum, or parents, my goal is for them to eat the food. My goal is
Mm-hmm.
for them to be able to watch their sister play basketball. Okay, that's the end goal. How
Mm-hmm.
they do it is not as important, and it can look different ways. So if your end goal is to take in the curriculum and learn her letters, if she's standing and rocking and she's able to show you that she's learning, then it does not matter what the way that her body, they're focusing more on the method rather than the outcome, right? So I always say, what's
Yeah.
the goal? So it's the same thing for handwriting or any sort of fine motor test. They're not sitting down and doing their handwriting. And I said, was the goal precision? Are we looking
Mm-hmm.
to see how they form the letters, or are you just testing how they are spelling? Because we could test
Mm-hmm.
spelling without handwriting. So it's reframing what is the end goal here, and then how we get there can look different from so many people if you give it a chance. But we're so used to the standard way of what it does look like for other kids or a lot of people to do this one thing, that we're stuck on making everyone do that. And that's, you could apply that to anything. I want them to sit at the dinner table and eat. What's the main goal here? Is the
Mm-hmm.
goal to have them sit just to see if they could sit, or is the goal, no, I want them to eat? If you want them to eat, what if they're more comfortable on the couch? What if they are more comfortable standing up? What is the goal? That is like
Mm-hmm.
my always the question. And then we work backwards from there, and that's how we tackle it.
I love that. So then regulation is what body posture state helps support our real goal to bring
Yes.
those two
And
pieces together.
yes. And what I remind parents is that we can use active regulation strategies where we're saying squeeze this or use this weighted lap pad. We can also rely on passive strategies. What can we adjust in the environment? What lights can we dim? Can we angle the chair? Can we have the child with the wall behind them so it blocks
Mm-hmm.
more sound and it's not bouncing around them? Right? There's a lot of little ways we can adjust the environment that's still contributing toward regulation. Because I think what parents forget or don't consider is that when we're talking about demands that are placed on the nervous system, it's not just explicit demands: eat, sit down, go brush your teeth. It's the demands of the environment that are being placed on your nervous system, like the sensory
Mm-hmm.
demands and the all of the workload that requires of your brain, which then actively take away from the skills that you're expecting to see at that moment too. So it's like this, it's really the problem that everyone thinks we're looking at. It's the wrong problem. And so we're going to use the wrong solution. So we need to take a step back and look at what we do have control over.
That's a great way of defining a sensory demand. And we've talked about this briefly, but it's like a withdrawal from the nervous system. And so if you saying to a really pressure sensitive kid, hey, go get on the trampoline instead of punching your brother. And
Mhm.
but they're super pressure sensitive, so now they've associated trampoline, which used to be associated with freedom and joy and big movement. Now it's, ooh, but I'm expected to do that.
Mhm.
And then it can be even their things that used to give them that sense of regulation can actually become dysregulating because they're associated with this demand or pressure expectation, which then what I've found is like having those strategies out can even be a withdrawal from their system. Just seeing something that feels like a demand is a demand. If that,
Yeah.
so how do you
Because
think about
they're
that dynamic of not pulling from their nervous system capacity as a baseline, like almost a passive strategy for regulation?
Yeah, this is a really tricky piece. And I don't know that I have the exact right answer for it, but you're right in that the inherent presence of something might trigger them to think, oh, the way that mom placed that on the table means that she's expecting me to use it. Right. And then automatically it's a big no. So I think a big part of this for it to work for some of our kids, and even when I talk to adults who experience the same sense, is that they have to have this baseline level of understanding what their body needs for
Mm,
themselves, for them to be able to make that connection, for them to be able to buy into it, for them to be able to say, I actually want to use that right now because
yeah.
it does fill a need for what my body is experiencing. So that's why I think things like visual menus of a sensory tool, that's rather than just placing the tool next to them for some kids as a
Mm,
reminder. But I also think that this ongoing conversation of what it means to give your body what it needs is
mm,
really important to keep going. And also reframing what the purpose of those sensory tools or strategies are, that it's not to make it so that you're less mad at your brother, that it's not
mm,
to make it so that you are less upset about something. It has nothing to do with the actual emotion. You get to have
mm,
whatever emotion you want to feel. The
mhm,
purpose of these strategies and tools is to help connect your brain and your body so that it's in
mm,
control. Because if you ask any of those kids, they're what they don't want, they're not saying I want to hurt my sibling when you ask
mhm.
them at a calm time.
Yeah.
When you ask them at a calm time, right?
Yeah.
No, I was so angry or they made me feel upset, so I wanted to make them upset.
Mhm.
That is not a I want to inflict pain on my sibling. And so reminding us and helping them understand where that dysregulation comes from, and that it's a instinctive part of their brain that we need to, when the lower brain is in control, to help mediate that. The sensory regulation tools is helping connect the brain to the body. So again,
Mm,
including our kids in the conversation, telling them why, and then finding and then helping them connect the dots of these different sensory strategies that feel good to them. I want to call out for any families that are listening. I understand that not all kids are at this level of receptive language to be able
yeah.
to have these conversations. So I acknowledge that, and that's not my wheelhouse. It's really, that really relies a lot more on the caregiver, which is a bigger burden on them to do the observation, to always do more trial and error,
Mhm.
because it's really tricky if they can't get on the same level as you.
Yeah, I've often felt when I was early on and I was trying to do different parent trainings and they would talk about just ask your kid this or just say this to your kid. And I was like, if I could do that, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be in this training.
Yes.
The whole
Yes.
point is that I
Yes.
can't have a conversation with them. So, like, give me something
Yes.
else. But that
I
reminds
know.
me of something you mentioned earlier about the passive regulation strategies, that there are so many things that you can just kind of
Yeah.
do a guess and check. If I lower the lights, do your
Yeah.
shoulders drop a little bit?
Yes.
Do you like what are the signs for this particular kid that they're feeling more regulated? And it also
Mm-hmm.
makes me wonder about what I call dropping demands proactively. But like in our house, we tried all the sensory things around making meals easier to try to help my kids eat. And ultimately, it was only when we started delivering them meals in their bedrooms that they were
Mm-hmm.
able to eat, because
Yeah.
listening to other people chew was just an uncrossable divide. And so it was
Yeah.
that bigger accommodation that opened up enough safety for them to be able to eat and try new foods and all of that. So tell me a little bit more about that side of things, like the side of things parents can do with or for more for their kids without needing that active participation.
Yeah. So, exactly like you're talking about, when we're thinking about lowering demands, like you said, we're also thinking about lowering demands of the environment and really scaffolding the task. So, again, we're starting at the end. The end goal is for them to consume the meal, to chew it and swallow it. And we don't have control over that. Like I always remind parents, we don't have the three most impacting activities on regulation in our day are the ones we have the least control over: sleep,
Mm.
toileting, and eating. No matter how much we think we have control, we cannot control them. We cannot force them to have a bowel movement, to use the potty, to fall asleep, or to chew
Mm-hmm.
and swallow food, unless they have a G tube that we were feeding them that way, right? We cannot control that. So, if that's the end goal, any of those three things that parents are thinking of, which have the biggest contribution to behavior, like if your child is constipated and withholding, or your child didn't get enough sleep, or your child is hungry, good luck with getting like any sort of behavior that you are looking for, right? So
Yeah.
if we're starting with that as the end goal, then we can't control that. What in front of that can we control? What do we have the ability to change that does not require the child to do it? So environmental shifts, mindset shifts, saying, okay, I'm going to change what they're eating, because if they're not eating this right now, I need them to be full, or else there's no way I'm going to get them to go in the car to get to the doctor's appointment that I need them, because they need to get this medication. Like we
Mm-hmm.
have to prioritize things on
Mm-hmm.
like on that kind of level. And then we need to get this level of acceptance there. A helpful framework that I teach parents is something called the nervous system budget. And it's this idea to help them remember that everybody wakes up with a certain allotment of budget, whether it's just this abstract number, it doesn't matter. But the idea is that certain tasks in your day deduct. It's like a spoon theory, but I like
Mm-hmm.
using numbers a little bit, right? So it deducts from your budget. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say your child wakes up with a budget of $20 in the morning, and the eating is something that deducts $5 from their nervous system because they're sensitive to the texture of food. And then in the environment, there's also tax added to that, like how bright the lights are, your little sister crying, the dog barking, the wetness on your face from mom wiping the food off of you. All of those
Mm-hmm.
added tax is making it more expensive. And then what we have by the end of the day is we're in overdrawn. We have negative amount in our nervous system. And for many neurodivergent folks, it doesn't just replenish, it rolls over. And then we're in this chronic state of withdrawal from our budget. We're in negative, and we can't, it's not like we go to sleep and we wake up with a fresh bank account of regulation. So to help mitigate that, we either deposit, quote, deposit to their nervous system by using sensory strategies if they will do them, or we can make tasks less expensive. Can we make breakfast less expensive? Instead of deducting $5, can it deduct $2 if we let them eat on the couch with headphones on while watching an iPad? And then that gives us more reserve for putting the seatbelt on in the car, for getting him to get out of the car to school. We need to have this forward thinking. So I often find parents finally accept this idea that they end up accommodating them more in the first half of the day to get them to last through the rest of the day, especially if they're still in a traditional school and there's a lot of things outside of our control. Then they get home and we can't, and we're running on a backwards treadmill, right? It's just really hard to get ahead of it at that point. So if we can front load them and we could provide the most cushion, the most added budget in the morning, then it gives us more of a runway in the afternoon.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the way that the chronic side of things shows up, I think that's the perfect description of how burnout
Yes.
can come for a lot of neurodivergent folks. And here I'm looking at you parents just as much as the kids, because it can be that our kids are actually doing well, but the number of accommodations that they need is driving us into the ground. And it's
Mm,
that chronic depletion, which is why I often talk about the need to drop demands for ourselves too, and to increase
yes.
sensory strategies for us too,
Yeah.
and explore like maybe for all your life you could handle driving in the car and just how visually overstimulating that is. But there can be times for us as parents where our level of dysregulation and the tasks that are taking out of our regulation bank every day make some things just too hard. I've known so many parents who are
Yeah.
like, I just can't drive. It's just, I'm
Yeah.
having a panic attack.
Yeah.
Or I just can't cook dinner anymore, just like with all the
Mm-hmm.
smells of their food, it's
Mm-hmm.
just too
Mm-hmm.
much.
Yep.
And that's a component of burnout that I talk about a lot, that part of what happens in burnout is that your sensory sensitivity increases because there's just not as much regulation in the tank. And I
Yeah.
wonder if you could talk about that dynamic. I think it just helps people understand what's happening on a brain and body
Mm-hmm.
level. Like, why am I
Yeah.
suddenly so sensitive to, and that,
Yeah.
fill in the blank, or their
Yeah.
kid?
Yeah.
Why are they screaming now? Or my daughter, so sensitive to light. It was so
Yeah.
sensitive to light and burnout that she needed like a cave environment in her
Mm.
room. Whereas that
Yeah.
she used to love the sun. So why is that happening?
Yeah.
Can you tell
Yeah.
us?
Yeah. Let's think about it from a primitive perspective, right? So like caveman days when
Mhm.
there was we're talking about like predators and we have to physically keep our bodies safe. When our nervous system detects threat, however, whether that's a 2026 level of threat or like a BC level of threat, right? When our nervous system perceives threat, we are wired to try to survive. And to help us try to survive, our nervous system perceives senses at a higher rate to try to keep us alive because we need to be able to hear every little sound. We need to be able to see motion so that we can run if something is coming towards us. We need to be able to smell if there's a predator lurking in the bushes. We need to be able to detect these things in our environment at such a precise level that it increases that level of awareness to try to keep us alive. So that's where
Mm.
that comes from, right? So that we can be on high alert to detect more threat in our environment. So in the modern world, when detection of threat is you have to go to school, or the detection of threat is get out of bed, or detection of threat is go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
and when we're just in this chronic state of dysregulation and we're always in this sympathetic activated state where we're ready to fight or flight, then our senses are just, it makes sense, they are heightened because it does that. It's wired that way to keep us alive, so we are aware of each of those
Mm.
threats. The problem is these threats are not inherently threatening to our physical safety. And that's that mismatch and there's no logic behind it. We can't tell our kids that the brightness of the light is not going to kill you because their nervous system, they inherently feel like it is going to kill me. It really does feel dangerous to me. And the only way I know how to deal with this is by blocking it out. And if it's not going to be blocked out, I'm going to kick and scream and do everything else that I can until it happens because I don't feel safe.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so helpful for all the things that might be going through your mind as you're making that proactive adjustment to the space. Part
Yeah.
of you is screaming, this is not that big of a deal. And maybe
Yes.
some of your upbringing is saying, just deal with it. But
Yes.
what you're saying is that neither of those are going to be helpful in this moment. They need
No.
accommodation.
I tell parents to think about, imagine, I don't know if anyone remembers that show, Fear Factor. Fear Factor. They imagine you're in that and someone poured a whole tub of cockroaches on you and told you to just calm down and not scream and not move at all.
Mhm.
Good luck. You don't like that, right? It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel safe. If someone's telling you that something is safe that doesn't feel safe to you, it is level impossible to try to control it unless someone's dangling $1 million in front of you and you know it's only temporary. So
Yeah.
those are in those kinds of environments. But that's how I try to help parents just try to understand that Luckily, the parents that I end up working with, at least one of them has some sort of connection with the child where they have similar sensory profiles because it's genetic. So they can
Mhm.
at least have that level of insight, but there's always at least one caregiver who doesn't quite get it. And I'm like, you don't have to really get it to support them. I just need you to know that this is what they need. You might get there, but you might never have the perspective of what it feels like. And that's okay. And you can still support them and just acknowledge that this is what they need. So that's where we have to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think that speaks like my neurotypical husband would say. He
Yeah.
just doesn't know what it feels like to be in a body
No.
that's so porous and so sensitive.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that he can't proactively accommodate and show up with
Exactly.
compassion. Like those two
Exactly.
things can both be true.
Yes. Yep. Agree.
Thank you so much for being here today. Really loved getting to talk to you.
Yay. The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much for inviting me.
If this podcast is speaking to your soul, you can subscribe through wherever you get your own podcasts. Even better, if you feel the nudge, head on over to Apple Podcasts in particular and leave us a review. It's such a helpful way for new people to also get to experience what this podcast wants to bring into their lives. I'm Amanda. Remember, it takes great strength to let things go. I'll see you next week.